It's another day with overcast skies in northern New Jersey, but there's no rain in the forecast. Welcome to Inside Look at Giants Training Camp presented by Quest Diagnostics. I'm Paul Dottino. He is two-time Super Bowl champion David Deal. Glad you could join us to talk more Giants football today. David, the Giants have a fully padded practice this morning. They've got another one tomorrow. Then they've got a situational scrimmage on Thursday. But on Saturday, they've got to cut to 53.
This is a huge week for this Giants football team, especially for the younger players. This is the week that you would be going into preseason game number 4 and would get the maximum amount of exposure because you were going to get most of the reps in this game. With that said, and with no preseason games, this is crucial for these last 2 padded practices and this last scrimmage on Thursday for these young players to make impact plays and catch the attention of all these coaches before it's too late, before cutdown day.
So I'm thinking you're expecting to see a lot more energy and a lot more intensity as these guys try to make one final impression to make a push.
No question. I mean, this is your last opportunity to impress this coaching staff, and the dress rehearsal is going to be on Thursday. So we always talk about it's not only what you do on the game field, it's what you bring from practice day in and day out, and you bring to those scrimmage games like they're going to this Thursday. So this week is going to be crucial, not just the physical aspect, but more importantly, the mental aspect, because you know the coaches are going to be putting more on the scale.
Today, you, the fans, voted to concentrate on the offensive line, and we could already see assistant coach Mark Colombo going through some preliminary drills. One thing about this Giants O-line, they're a lot bigger and stronger than they have been in the past.
No question. I mean, you see a bigger group developing, and the minute that Dave Gettleman came in as a general manager, this was the purpose that he talked about, building this football team from the inside out of the O-line and the D-line. And you do see a much bigger, much stronger offensive line than we've seen put together in a longer period of time. But more than anything, the continuity of this group must come together and continue to work when you're playing the Pittsburgh Steelers opening week on Monday night.
What is Coach Colombo looking for here?
He's working inside zone running scheme. So basically we're working a one-on-one stretch. He's working uncoiling the hips, getting those hands low and inside, and lifting at that shoulder pad with the inside hand leverage to make sure that you're getting the defensive lineman back on its heels.
Is the most common mistake a guy getting his hands caught outside, or is it not getting them high enough?
Number one, it's getting them outside, because that way you don't control the defensive lineman. He has interior hands, so he's going to control you. The second part is constantly uncoiling those hips and continue the leg drive. That's why you see them working almost knee to knee and building as they're lifting with that upper body.
We saw last week when they had a horizontal net that they were asking the offensive linemen to make sure that they moved under, and that was all about keeping leverage and staying low.
No question. You could be the biggest, you can be the strongest, but if you don't come out of your stance with leverage and get underneath the defensive tackle and maintain that plane, it doesn't matter how big or strong you are. The low man wins when it comes to the line of scrimmage.
A guy like Andrew Thomas, the first-round pick, number 78, how difficult is it for him to be able to do all of these mechanical things when he is such a large guy?
I mean, you don't get taken number 4 overall by the New York Giants if you don't have a lot of the techniques and fundamentals that Coach Colombo is coaching right now. The big thing that you have to see come together is the mental and the physical. When you have a new offense thrown at you and there's so much on your plate, it's easy to sit there, instead of throwing your hands, placing your hands. Confidence is built through repetition, and it's going to be no different from Andrew Thomas. The more confident he gets in his personnel and his assignment, the more confident he'll get with his techniques and fundamentals.
One of the other draft picks that the Giants took, in fact, it was in round number 3, was Matt Pratt out of Uconn. And people said that when he got here, he was going to have to add strength and power. I think from what we've seen, David, he appears to be maybe a little further along than maybe some people thought.
He's definitely made strides here during training camp. You could see him day in and day out make progress. You see his technique, his footwork being more consistent than it was at Uconn. And the big thing that I like to see out of him are his hands, like we're talking about. Instead of placing them, being violent with them, the more confident that he's getting with his set right now, you see those big, long arms extending and keeping the defensive end away from his body.
I know it's early because we haven't seen him in a real game yet, but do you think it's realistic for him to potentially compete for a tackle job before the season is over?
No question. each and every week. The staff is evaluating you in practice, heading into that game, and what's going to be the best matchup versus your offensive tackle versus that defensive end that you have in the upcoming week. And that's something that you're taught from day one. Don't be satisfied. Don't sit here and be complacent because you didn't earn that starting job. In any whim, in any moment, that challenge and that opportunity can be brought to you. You better capitalize on it because it's not happening often.
Speaking of opportunity, because Spencer Pulley had missed some of the last practices over the past week, Nick Gates has really seized that chance, and he played well the other night in the scrimmage and has done everything they've asked of him during these practices.
I think that Nick Gates has pretty much solidified himself as the starting center. You know, we knew him as almost a Swiss Army knife. Something that I was very used to doing is moving around and bouncing positions. But I really think that he's found a home here in the middle at center. He did a great job of communicating, getting up to the line of scrimmage, getting all his pre-snap calls out, and he played a solid scrimmage where he didn't have as many one-on-ones as I would like to have seen in pass protection, but that's something that we're going to continue to build as we're moving towards Thursday.
The other night we saw Tyler Haycraft, an undrafted rookie free agent out of Louisville who was a tackle in college, get a bunch of reps at center. Again, Pulley was not available. We're getting a look at Haycraft there, number 61, behind Coach Colombo. How do you think he fared?
One of your best abilities is versatility. The fact that you can bounce around and play different positions, especially when we know that it's a dwindled minute number that you can hold in that old line room. So the fact that he's showing his versatility is a plus, and you never know. Anything can happen when it comes time to come to that cut day on Saturday. There's no guarantees for anybody on this roster. Who's to say that he may not be one of those developmental guys, just like Nick Gates was, who's the starting center right now for the Giants?
We're also getting a look at number 71, Will Hernandez, now entering his third NFL season. What does he have to do to take the next step in his game?
Well, I see him playing with so much more confidence and really taking on that leadership role. You know, a lot of times we talk about as an offensive lineman, it's better to be seen and not heard, but at times you got to get vocal, and Will Hernandez has stepped into that, confident and comfortable going into his third year. You really see him taking on that leadership role with Andrew Thomas. If you see Will, you see Andrew, because those two are walking together everywhere they go. The big aspect that we need to see him continue to improve on is we know his physicality. We know that he wants to maul on inside, but he's got to do a better job of keeping his head and shoulders back when he's striking on the interior of that offensive line.
What is Coach Colombo doing here as he talks to the three starting interior linemen?
So basically they're working inside-outside zone. So they're working the meshes and the double teams between the center and the guard, and then they're adding in the backside guard into it. Because when you're running a full zone, usually it's on or inside or on outside based upon if it's going to the perimeter or if it's an inside zone. This is working on the feeling of the down guy and the communication of working up to the second level so that the linebacker doesn't run unscathed.
I guess it's always good to see Mr. Steady. There's Shane Lemieux, by the way, out of Oregon, who had a really nice block on Wayne Gallman's big touchdown run the other night.
Anytime you put on the pads, Shane Lemieux stands out. He's a physical, big-bodied, inside, basically same type of thing. Phone booth mauler that you love to see out of an offensive lineman. Showed his durability in college, showed his versatility here, but he's one of those young players that when we saw him play in that scrimmage on Friday, he likes the excitement, he likes the hitting aspect of it, and the lights weren't too big for him.
I think he's done the number 66 pretty proud.
He has. I had to yell at him the one time where he jumped off sides and was doing a lap out here. I said, 66s, we don't do laps out here for mental errors. But he has. He's shown himself as a mature, tough football player, and he's going to be a bright side of this offensive lineman for the time to come.
Good to see Spencer Pulley, number 77, being able to take some reps in practice again. As we mentioned earlier, he had missed a few sessions, been a little bit nicked up, but of course now with only another week or so to go before you get things finalized, you want to make sure you're on the field.
No question, because once again, we're talking about nobody's guaranteed to make this roster come Saturday. He's another one of these players. Played a lot of football, veteran player, understands and knows this offense. But we know when it comes down to the roster cuts, it comes down to who's going to be the return on investment and who in the long run is going to be the best for our offensive linemen. So he's in battle himself, knowing that Nick Gates took over right now at center.
I need to ask you something, because we've talked all about the versatility of these guys. We've talked about guys who are moving in and out at center. It's the one position along the line that you never played in the NFL.
Never.
Did you want to give it a shot?
You know, at 6'6", I never enjoyed center when you're going up against those sawed-off fire plug nose tackles. And I always used to joke around, I can snap and I can block. I just don't do so well doing them at the same time. That makes playing center null and void.
Wow, not a bad idea. As we continue to watch some of these offensive line drills, and Cameron Fleming the other night was the starting right tackle. And,
yep.
You know, again, a guy who's a technician, and as we heard from Coach Colombo, he's a guy who really understands the game very well.
No question. Obviously, we can go back to his familiarity with Joe Judge in New England or with Jason Garrett and Mark Colombo in Dallas. He knows this scheme. He knows how it's built. And right now, you see him working with Kevin Zeitler. This is called a deuce. This is a double team to where you're either working to the front side linebacker or to the backside linebacker based on whether you're running duo or whether you're pulling the backside guard and running power. So this is continuing to work those mesh and fits between the guard and the tackle.
How hard do you think it is for a guy like Zeitler to be as consistent as he has been for nearly a decade in this league when he's played in different systems? He's played with different guys next to him virtually every year. I have to admire the guy.
No question. I mean, the one thing that you always sit here and you think about, what do they say on your airplane? If the masks come down, you've got to put yours on first before you can help anyone else. It's no different than playing offensive line. Once you're confident and steady with your techniques and fundamentals, it allows you to adjust to the people around you. And this isn't something that's unfamiliar to Kevin Zeitler. Going back to those times when he was in Cleveland, he had a different rotation of right tackles next to him. So the communication factor and the leadership and the veteran leadership out of him is something that's going to shine bright. And once again, we talked about it. He's not a big vocal guy. He leads by example. He leads by his work ethic, and everybody on the team respects him for it.
Now, we have often talked about the chemistry of an offensive line extends far beyond the field. If you were to give these guys some advice over the final couple of weeks as they get ready for the September 14th opener against the Steelers, would it be to make sure you guys are doing video games and having eats together and that kind of stuff away from the facility?
I mean, anytime that you can form a bond away from the field is a huge thing, not only just for the development of an offensive line, but the development of a football team. That's where you build that brotherhood. That's where you build that accountability, and that's where your families truly come together. Obviously, this is in a different time than we're used to because of coronavirus, but during the off season, our families were together. We were always spending time with one another, and when you continue to build that bond and you know that the guy next to you is fighting just as hard as you're fighting for him, that's when great things happen, and that's when you take ownership of a football team.
One of the things we should tell people is that there is a rule change in the NFL this year. You know, typically you have 46 players active on game day. But this year, the league is allowing, because of the whole coronavirus situation, every team's going to have the opportunity to have 2 additional active players, so they can have 48 players for kickoff. However, there is also a mandate you must have a minimum of 8 offensive linemen active, and that's a new rule.
No question. I mean, that's a rule because we know when it comes time to manipulate in roster size, and if you could add those 2, what would be the first spot that a lot of coaches would go to? They would dwindle down their offensive line, make it a minimum to 6 or 7, and try to load up the box in other areas. This rule is not going to allow them to do that. And when you think about it, when you think of circumstances that we've had to overcome, I mean, I remember getting hurt one time in Philadelphia. We didn't have enough linemen up. Our coach was working with, Coach Flaherty was working with Fred Robbins to try to go over to the snap count. There was a point in Atlanta where Levine Toilolo played right tackle because they were down in numbers. So the fact that you have to solidify your offensive line to add those 2, I think is a brilliant move.
I would suspect, too, that the backup offensive linemen who may or may not feel very good on game day because under usual circumstances, maybe that 8th guy didn't know if he was getting a jersey, is now going to be much more engaged, I would think, knowing that, oh, you know what? I'm going to get a jersey on Sunday.
I would hope so, because once again, we're talking about a game of physical violence and hitting. At any time, in any moment in a game, your number could be called. Think about how many times Joe Judge during a game has had to go up to somebody in the 2nd or 3rd quarter that may have been the starting linebacker. Hey, we just had our L3 go down. You need to step in and fill that void. It's no difference when we're sitting here talking about offensive linemen, because it may not only be in playing on the offensive side of the ball. It could be on field goal. It can be on PAT. There's other components that all O-linemen have to be alert of.
Finally, we'll get a chance here to see some snaps. And I saw a very nice combo block there against Dalvin Tomlinson, who's a load in himself.
Oh, no question. We always talk about when you get those double teams, whoever's the start is the pry. You got to stand them up. And then the knockdown guy, the key is to try to get a defender on one leg, because that's your one way of knowing that you're getting leverage, you're underneath him, and you can get movement of him off of the point of attack.
How much do you subscribe to that coach's motto about how iron sharpens iron? Because I think the Giants' defensive line did a very, very good job of testing those guys the other day.
No question. When something happens out on the football field and you lose that battle, don't lose the lesson that you learned from losing that battle, whether it was your techniques, whether it was your fundamentals. Yes, there are times that the other guy on the field beats you just on a specific move, but 9 times out of 10, when you're an offensive lineman, it's the false step that you took. It's not throwing your hands. It's not being physical when you're at your 3rd or your 5th point of intersection in your pass set. There's always ways to learn from it. When you face an active defensive line group like the one that we saw out of the Giants on Friday, it only lets you be more aware of the things that you need to work on getting ready for week 1.
We're getting a look here over the last couple of snaps. Veterans such as Marcus Golden and Kyler Fackrell giving some pass rush off the edge against young guys like Pratt and Thomas. That's a really good way for those guys to learn.
No question. When you're working up against veterans that have not only initial move, but secondary and backup moves, that's the one thing that will show up when you're sitting here playing and when you're going up against the veterans, because just like anybody else on the other side of the field, they're diagnosing what you're giving up. What are your tells? Are you leaning heavy outside? Are you setting outside of the framework and giving up an inside rush? Those are things that veterans can pick up very quickly just by their pre-snap designation of how you're lined up and where your spacing is compared to your guard.
How hard is it for a young player, as we see the Giants going through some running drills, a young offensive lineman to do his own tape study on himself to realize that, I'm tipping my block? Like they talk in baseball about a pitcher tipping his pitches.
Well, I mean, it's one thing. You have to be evaluated on what you're watching yourself. You know when you're sitting in your stance, if you're showing pass or if you're showing run, based upon how much weight is distributed. But that's the one thing that I will say that's great about Coach Colombo is he's played the game. He's studied offensive line, and he's doing those same things that they have to do themselves by evaluating, okay, you're lighting your hand, you're showing, you're pulling. He's identifying those things to the players as long as they continue to stride and show that they want to correct those mistakes.
If there is one thing that would be typical of what Dallas's offensive line ran that you would like to see Coach Colombo bring to this offensive line, what would it be?
I mean, I love power scheme, but when you're running and basing everything off of play action, 35-34 Bob, where that run play out of 2 backs is running right off of that tackle, whether he widens out the defensive end or if the defensive end plays inside, that allows the cohesion in the offensive line to get a full takeoff and be on the aggressors and move the line of scrimmage.
I think it's very telling right now that Coach Colombo's doing so much with these guys. Clearly, he's coaching them up an awful lot. And this is the time when, with time running out here in training camp, where these guys have to mold together as best as they possibly can.
Yeah, and a lot of times when you have more time during training camp, you're working just guards together or centers together. But the fact that they're working full line, they're working on continuing to feel the reps of the double team, the footwork that you need to have to the person next to you. Those are the things that can't be duplicated by just doing it solo. So the fact that they're doing full line, it gives them a full feel of what it's like to take off and the looks that they're going to be facing based upon how the defense moves along with it.
One of the things we saw the other day, the running backs getting involved a lot. Pass protection's a big deal because, let's face it, if somebody does leak through, somebody's got to pick them up. I thought that Dion Lewis is a guy who has expressed a tremendous amount of satisfaction in making sure that he helps his quarterback stay on his feet.
No question. I mean, that's going to be crucial, not only during the football season, but especially starting off against the Pittsburgh Steelers. They'll play a 3-4 hybrid on 3rd down where they're having defensive ends, they're having TJ Watt, they're having linebackers walk around so that it's a numbers game. You got to know who you've got to pick up, you've got to designate it, and the running back has to know, okay, the offensive line is responsible for these 5. Okay, I see my bat player, wherever he goes, I'm responsible for him. The fact that Dion Lewis is a veteran, has gone through it, and knows this offense and the way that they want to pick up the blitz schemes, that's crucial for this team.
Quarterback Daniel Jones now taking some of his reps. Looked like that one may have been deflected or at the very least slipped out of his hands. And I think, to be honest with you, the Giants are very lucky with their quarterbacks room right now because they've got a bunch of really smart guys back there behind Daniel Jones. And Colt McCoy's had a pretty good camp himself.
He really has. You could see his grasp, his understanding and knowledge of this offense show through, clearly communicating at the line of scrimmage, in and out of the huddle. He knows whether or not it's the right personnel group or not, and that's only going to help not only him and the rest of the offense, but it's going to help Daniel Jones.
All right, David, so before we get out of here, what are some of the final things that you would be looking for if you were the coaching staff over this last week before they make the cuts?
Who's going to continue to come out here and fight with intensity, earn the right to be on this 53-man roster, and who come this Thursday scrimmage who are going to know, adapt, and adjust and not make the same mistake twice and show that they can be trusted on the game field come September 14th. That's the big thing, the mental side of it, the mental toughness aspect is what I'm looking for this week.
Okay, so we count it down to Saturday when teams have to get down to 53. David Deal, it's been great to see you.
Always a pleasure, Dots.
For David, I'm Paul Dottino. We will see you next time on Inside Look of Giants Training Camp presented by Quest Diagnostics.